At 6 o'clock in the morning, a billionaire wakes up. But if you walk past his house, you probably wouldn't know. There is no Lamborghini screaming down the street, no designer outfit covered in logos, no Instagram story showing a private jet, no caption saying, "Grateful for this life." His coffee machine costs less than some people's monthly rent. His car is several years old, and his neighbors probably think he's just another successful guy who likes his privacy. But there's something they don't know. While they're checking the price of groceries, he's checking the performance of companies worth billions. While they're worrying about next month's rent, his assets may be producing more money in a day than most people earn in years. And while social media tells you that being rich means looking rich, quiet billionaires understand something completely different. Real wealth doesn't need an audience. Today, we're following one fictional billionaire through an ordinary day. Not because this is exactly how every billionaire lives, it isn't, but because this day reveals something far more valuable than what billionaires buy. It reveals how someone with enormous wealth thinks, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why the quietest person in the room might actually be the most financially powerful. But there's one decision this billionaire makes before breakfast, and it might be the most important decision of his entire day. His first rule is simple: don't start the day consuming noise. No endless scrolling, no checking what strangers think about him, no waking up and immediately comparing his life to someone else's highlight reel. Instead, he spends the first few minutes doing something surprisingly boring. He thinks, what matters today? What doesn't? Where should his attention go? Because when you have enormous wealth, the biggest problem isn't necessarily money, it's attention. You can buy almost anything, but you cannot buy another 24 hours. And that changes the way you think about time. For most people, money is the scarce resource. For someone extremely wealthy, time becomes even more valuable. That's why quiet wealth often looks boring from the outside. There is less urgency to prove something, less pressure to impress, less temptation to say yes to everything. And that creates something most people spend their entire lives trying to find: control. Think about your own life. How many things do you do because you actually want to? And how many do you do because everyone else is doing them? That question matters, because the billionaire's real luxury isn't his house, it isn't his car, it isn't his watch. It's the ability to decide what deserves his attention. Imagine having enough money that you could buy a yacht, but your biggest flex is turning your phone on Do Not Disturb. Honestly, that's probably the most billionaire thing imaginable. At 7 a.m., breakfast arrives. And here's where the fantasy breaks. It's not covered in gold. It's not prepared by a celebrity chef juggling flaming pans. It's simple: coffee, eggs, fruit, maybe toast. Because once you have enough money, spending another $500 on breakfast doesn't fundamentally improve your life. There is a point where consumption stops creating meaningful happiness, and after that point, you are mostly paying for novelty. The quiet billionaire understands this. He doesn't ask, how expensive can I make my life? He asks, what actually makes my life better? That's a completely different question. And it applies even if you have $500 in your checking account. You don't need billions to think this way. You can start with $50. Instead of asking, what can I buy? Ask, what can this money do for future me? Maybe it pays down expensive debt. Maybe it goes into savings. Maybe it buys something that improves your skills. Maybe it simply stays untouched. That last option sounds boring, but boring can be powerful, because wealth is often built through decisions that aren't exciting in the moment. At 8 a.m., the billionaire finally looks at his money. But here's the twist. He isn't staring at a giant bank balance. His wealth isn't simply sitting in cash. A significant portion of enormous fortunes can be tied to ownership, businesses, equities, real estate, and other assets. And this changes everything, because the average person thinks money equals cash. The wealthy often think money equals ownership. Ownership of businesses, ownership of productive assets, ownership of investments, ownership of things that can potentially generate future cash flow or appreciate over time. Now imagine two people. Person A makes $1 million. They spend $900,000. Person B makes $1 million. They spend $100,000 and use the rest to build assets. Both made $1 million, but they are building completely different futures. That's why income and wealth aren't the same thing. Income is what comes in. Wealth is what you keep and own. And that distinction is one of the most important lessons in this entire story. At 9 a.m., the billionaire enters a meeting. His team isn't there to discuss what watch he's buying. They're discussing risk, taxes, businesses, investments, long-term plans, philanthropy, succession, and what could go wrong. Because extreme wealth creates an unusual problem. You don't just have more opportunities, you have more ways to make mistakes. A bad investment can cost millions. decisions. A poorly structured business deal can cost more. A careless decision can affect employees, families, investors, and entire organizations. So the quiet billionaire doesn't try to be the smartest person in every room. He hires people who know things he doesn't. That's an underrated part of wealth. Leverage. You don't personally do everything. You build systems, you build teams, you build processes. You protect your attention for the decisions where your judgment actually matters. And that's something you can copy immediately. You don't need a family office, you need a system. Automate your savings, track your spending, learn the basics of investing, set financial goals, review your progress. The goal isn't to become a billionaire tomorrow. The goal is to stop making decisions randomly. By 11 a.m., something interesting happens. The billionaire gets an opportunity. A company wants him to invest. The potential return looks enormous. Everyone in the room is excited, but he says no. And this is where most people misunderstand wealth. They think rich people say yes to everything. Private jet? Yes. Mansion? Yes. Business? Yes. Luxury watch? Yes. But real financial freedom creates another superpower: the ability to say no. No to bad investments. No to unnecessary meetings. No to people who waste your time. No to purchases that don't matter. No to opportunities that look exciting but don't fit the plan. Because sometimes the best financial decision isn't making more money, it's avoiding losing what you already have. And that principle works at every level. If you have $1,000, protecting it matters. If you have $100,000, protecting it matters more. If you have $1 billion, protecting it becomes a full-time responsibility. At noon, he eats lunch, and nobody knows. That's the point. The modern internet has created a strange relationship with wealth. We're constantly being shown what expensive living looks like: luxury cars, designer clothes, penthouse tours, private jets, five-star hotels. But there is another version of wealth that gets far less attention: stealth wealth. The idea is simple. Your net worth doesn't need to be visible. Keeping wealth private can reduce unwanted attention and help avoid the pressure to constantly increase your lifestyle. The quiet billionaire doesn't need strangers to know what he owns, because he already knows. And that leads to a powerful question. If nobody could see your lifestyle, what would you actually buy? Would you still need the expensive car? Would you still need the giant house? Would you still need the designer logo? Or would you spend money on things that genuinely improve your life? Better health, more freedom, more time with family, travel, learning, experiences, peace. That question can completely change the way you spend. At 2 p.m., the glamorous part of being a billionaire disappears. Paperwork, legal decisions, taxes, risk management, security, insurance, estate planning, business problems, people problems. This is the part nobody puts in the Instagram reel. Because wealth isn't just freedom, it's responsibility. The more you own, the more there is to manage. And the more people depend on you, the more carefully you have to make decisions. This is why the fantasy of unlimited money can be misleading. Money can remove certain problems, but it can create new ones. Your biggest problem may no longer be, can I afford this? It becomes, is this worth my time? And that is a completely different problem. At 4 p.m., he reviews something different. Not his stock portfolio, not his real estate, not his bank accounts, his impact. Because eventually, money reaches a point where buying more things becomes less interesting. So the question changes. What can this money accomplish? A school, a research project, a business, a foundation, a scholarship, a technology company, a community, a cause he actually believes in. The point isn't that every billionaire is automatically generous. They aren't. The point is that extreme wealth creates the possibility of turning money into something larger than consumption. And that leads to the final lesson. The highest form of wealth isn't having more things. It's having more options, more control over your time, more ability to help your family, more freedom to pursue meaningful work, more capacity to walk away from situations that don't align with your values. That's what people are really chasing when they say, I want to be rich. They usually don't want money. They want freedom. At 7 p.m., the workday ends. And this is perhaps the most surprising moment. Nothing dramatic happens. No fireworks, no celebration, no champagne tower. He goes home. He has dinner. He talks to people he cares about. Maybe he reads. Maybe he takes a walk. Maybe he simply sits outside and watches the sunset. And after everything, the billionaire's life looks almost ordinary. That's the paradox. The richer he becomes, the less he needs to prove. Because when you have nothing to prove, you stop performing. And when you stop performing, you become free. At 10 p.m., the billionaire checks one final thing. Not his net worth, his calendar, tomorrow, and the next day, and the next year. Because the real goal was never to become rich for one day. It was to build a life that could survive decades. That's the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. And maybe that's the most important lesson for you. You probably don't have millions sitting in investment accounts. You might be starting with a few $100s. Maybe you're paying off debt. Maybe you're trying to get your first job. Maybe you're building a business after work. Maybe you're just trying to stop wasting every paycheck. That's okay. Because wealth doesn't begin when you become rich. It begins when you start thinking differently about money. When you stop asking, how can I look successful? And start asking, how can I become financially independent? When you stop asking, what can I buy today? And start asking, what can I own tomorrow? When you stop chasing attention and start chasing freedom. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The person driving the loudest car isn't necessarily wealthy. The person wearing the most expensive clothes isn't necessarily wealthy. And the person posting the most luxurious lifestyle definitely isn't automatically wealthy. Sometimes real wealth looks incredibly boring. A paid-off life, a diversified portfolio, a growing business, low financial stress, a protected future, and the freedom to say, no, I don't need that. That's quiet wealth. And if you can learn that mindset before you become wealthy, you might actually have a chance of staying wealthy when you get there. Because the ultimate luxury isn't owning everything. It's needing very little to feel free. And tomorrow morning, our billionaire wakes up again. 6 a.m., same quiet room, same coffee, same discipline. But while the world is still asleep, his assets are working. And that's where the real story begins.